G'day guys, welcome back to SuperCoach TV. For the start today, you've got myself, Tim Michell, and Dan Batten. As you can see, still in isolation somewhat. There's a few of us filtering back into the office now as we get closer to that June 11th start date for AFL footy, which we can't wait for. But the two sort of key names beyond us are a couple that we're going to look at later in the show in Sam Stewart and Jack Viney that you can see below us. But firstly, Dan, great to have you on, mate, and hope you're keeping well.
Thanks, mate. Yeah, just trying to keep busy as I can in ISO, but yeah, it's great to have SuperCoach back, and there's some, as you mentioned, Sam Stewart will be one of the big talking points over the next couple of weeks, especially with his he was a number one rookie trade target until last night or yesterday afternoon when he's had a bit of an injury hiccup.
Yeah, so we'll obviously run through that shortly because he was going to be the number one target for, I think, most coaches with after a score of 100 against Essendon in round one. But just to recap, and before Al does jump on and join us as well. So the top scorers from round one was that long ago, you might have forgotten about it. Jack Viney scored 186 for Melbourne against West Coast, so he'll be a pretty popular target this week. You can see Jack down in the right-hand corner of the screen, sporting a pretty nice moustache as well. Ben Cunnington from the Roos scored 185, but he's got Matt DeBoer next up, so I wouldn't stress too much about him, although he's a nice pod if you do want to go there. And then Brodie Grundy in a round that was dominated by Ruckman was the next best, 179. And those that have had a listen to our SuperCoach Box podcast this week will know as well that Brodie had a points per minute of 2.3, which is well and truly above the 1.37, which Nick Naitanui managed last year. That was ranked number one as well, Dan, and that was sort of a really big takeaway from round one, wasn't it? The fact that the rucks absolutely dominated, and I think sort of the likes of John Segler and Darcy Ford, who I believe both feature in your team, they're going to be pretty popular this week as coaches look to get as many of those big men in as possible.
Yeah, definitely. I took a bit of a calculated punt. Actually, went with your advice in taking Darcy Ford, and it paid. There's Al with his Tiger scarf on. But as I was saying, you're going to be wanting to look for the players that have a high impact. So getting high impact possessions like potentially a Marcus Bontempelli, or players that are around the ball a lot, which is obviously Ruckman. Guys like Max Gawn, even Max Gawn, as we mentioned on the podcast, had 14 touches in round one, and managed to score 93 points when he was really outplayed by Nick Naitanui. His big games where he scores 130, 140 could become 170, 180. So those trading amount may have to reconsider, I guess, but it also brings a lot more tactics into play. You might be looking at a Jeremy Howe who, his intercept possessions are going to get potentially 10 points, whereas before they may have got, 6 or 7.
Yeah, we do want to welcome Al Paton shortly, but just before we do, if you want to leave us a comment at any stage as well, or drop us a question regarding your SuperCoach team, I'm sure you're playing around with those 5 trades that you've now got for round 2 to tinker with your team and try and make sure you've got a full squad to play with from June 11 onwards when footy is back. You can leave a comment below on our Facebook page and we'll endeavour to get to those. But Al, it's been a big day for you. Your 5 trades have gone up on the website. What's the early feedback been like?
Well, they haven't been up for too long, so I haven't seen too much yet. I'll have to check my Twitter mentions. But I sort of sat on the fence a bit by actually put up 10 trades by putting out 2 sort of options. If you'd see some of the scribbled notes that I've got around here, it's ridiculous how many different paths you can go down. The different possible combinations of 5 trades is almost unlimited. I've got, I reckon I've got it down to about sort of half a dozen or, up to maybe 10 players that are on the list that I think are, guys I'd like to bring in because I want to get on them before the price goes up, or, I wish I'd picked them in round 1 and I missed out, or whether it's a, money-making exercise, and hopefully, guys who tick both those boxes are probably at the top of the list, like a Viney type, where you can potentially come down from a midfield premium, hopefully not lose too many points, but make a couple $100,000. So I'm sure you guys have talked about this already, but cash is just going to be absolute king this year, as it always is, but especially when you've got a shorter season, less time to build our teams and, make the money to bring in those premiums that we love to do. So, yeah, anyone who thinks about to go through the roof price-wise, I think you just have to be on them. But, yeah, I've sort of come down with 2 different strategies. And there's, neither of these are locked in stone by any stretch. I think we're going to have a lot of tinkering between now and the round 2 lockout. Obviously, we're guessing a fair bit on what the teams are going to look like. So when we actually see those, that's going to cause a fair bit of frantic activity, I think. But there's sort of the one school of thought I've got is to sort of stick with the basic structure that I had to start with and just tinker around the edges a bit, fix some of the obvious issues. And probably the main one is down in defence, where rookies, it's just an absolute graveyard. There's really no bottom price rookies playing at all. And even, we sort of tried to play it a bit safe by picking an Isaac Cummings or a Dylan Robertson types, and they were all terrible as well. I looked up some stats the other night, and John Noble was at 215 grand, and thankfully he performed. So hopefully he's safe in the Collingwood team. But I think there's 9 players under 215,000 who actually played in round 1, which sounds actually like, there's more probably than I was expecting. But out of all those, the top scorers were Isaac Cumming, my man, who got 57. Zerk Thatcher got 49. And both of those guys, every chance to be dropped. And then the other 7 were all under that. There were a lot of 20, 30, 20 and 30 sort of type scores. And then Fisher Mackesy obviously coming in at sort of the 190K mark, and he scored 16. So the defensive rookie stocks are an absolute nightmare. And so unless something miraculous happens, which, who knows? We really don't know what's going to happen with the teams. And, we're all crossing our fingers and toes that John Longmire sees the light and brings Will Gould in, which would solve a lot of problems for everybody. But if that doesn't happen, then if someone like a Cumming or a Zerk Thatcher or Robertson, at least Robertson's going to play, so people who've got him probably might have to keep him. I don't have him, but, I've got the other 2 guys. If they're not playing, it probably means trading them out and going up. You need to find someone more expensive. And there's not many in that, 200, 300,000 price range. I had a bit of a look. Jordan Ridley is someone I actually started looking up, so it sort of shows you how dire things are getting. He's around the 300K mark, scored 100 in round 1, and his preseason was actually really good for Essendon too. Had an average around the 100 mark, but I just don't know how much you can trust him. He came in last year, and a few people picked him, thought he looked quite promising, and he scored sort of in the 50, 60 mark, and then sort of was out of the team again fairly quickly. So then, from there, you're going up to Howe is the obvious one that Dan mentioned. 431,000. So, that's a pretty good price for someone who you'd hope could average around the 100. Obviously, he went absolutely bonkers in round 1. Probably not going to score that every week, but, he's been in the 90s pretty regularly in his past history as a SuperCoach player. So I think we can have some confidence that he'll score around that at least. So, that's an obvious one. But, to get from even Cumming to him, that's nearly 200,000. So you've got to find that cash somewhere. So, yeah, as I was saying, you can either sort of play a little bit safe and, concentrate on fixing those issues, and it might mean bringing in Bont goes down to Viney. That's a move that I'm looking at pretty strongly to sort of find that kind of money. And then the other way of doing it is just to really think, like, I think I'm ranked 58,000. So, how much did I actually get right in round 1? Obviously, a few things happened that we couldn't predict, and who knows if those trends will continue. But do I just toss the whole thing out and, go for broke and try something really radical? And that mainly would be, as you discussed, Max Gawn is the obvious one to try and make just an absolute truckload of cash by trading him down to one of those cheap rucks who all performed really well. Naismith, and I sort of looked at a few of them. I like Sam Jacobs. I think he's, a solid-ish kind of pick. And I see Connor Dennis is asked about him. He was definitely one that I looked closely at. But then when you look at the Giants' draw, it's not that promising. I think he has to play Grundy in a couple of weeks. So maybe even Gawn as well. So that sort of put me off him a bit. And I think if you're going to just go for money, well, why not just go the whole hog and go all the way down to Naismith and make a heap of cash and just hope Naismith stays in the team. And that allows me to maybe fix the defence. Maybe I could upgrade Tom Green to Viney, get him that way in the midfield. And, even in the forward line, I've potentially got enough money left over to get John Segler, who was another one of those ruckmen who scored all right, but you can get him as a forward. He's a forward ruck, and I don't mind the idea of having a bit of insurance for Naismith because even though he's the number 1 ruckman at the Swans right now, we know Callum Sinclair is in the wings as well. So, one bad game, and if Longmire made that change, we'd all be up the creek without a paddle. So if you're going down the Naismith route, I don't mind the idea of having Segler as a forward, as a bit of a backup. But, I looked up Naismith, I think he scored 121. That was his second or third time he's ever scored 100 in his career. He usually averages around 60 or 70, and he's missed 2 years with a knee injury. So how much can we rely on him? That's enough talking from me, gents. What do you reckon?
Yeah, no, well, I think you've touched on the key point, Al, and we've discussed this in the last couple of days since SuperCoach came back, is that you're going to have to find the way this year, aren't you, to generate cash, which in any previous season we would have just gone, okay, well, you get as many of the rookies with great break-evens in as possible. You sit on them for half a season and then you trade them out when they get to 350, 400,000, back to another rookie, load your team with premiums, and away you go and you attack SuperCoach finals. But we don't have that luxury. We're not playing in a 23-round season. We don't have that 3 rounds of buys where we can use 9 trades and really bolster our team either. We've got the 5 going into round 2. But I think a lot of coaches are going to have, probably considering that at the moment, looking at maybe players above that top rookie price. So, Brandon Zerk-Thatcher's at about the top range, but even going up towards maybe somewhere between 250 and 300,000. And I know, looking at the Phantoms 5 trades that got released a couple of days ago, he threw up my boy Brett Bewley, who scored 95 in round 1. He's 252,000, and he's got a handy break even based on that round 1 performance. You've got Ben Long, who's about 30,000 more than him, 283,000, and he's coming off 118 in round 1. So you speak about making a truckload of cash. He's another one that's going to shoot up pretty quickly as well.
And Darcy Ford.
And Darcy Ford, who both Dan and I started with as well. And we know that Rucks will look like they're going pretty well, although he's another like Sam Naismith who's got Reece Stanley waiting in the wings if he happens to have one bad game. But obviously any of us that started with Darcy Ford will have their fingers crossed that he keeps his spot for round 2 as well. So I think that might be a path that a lot of coaches are looking at going down, maybe paying a little bit more initially. But obviously the trade-off on that means that you can get to 400,000, 450,000 if your player continues their form. You might get there 2 weeks before a rookie does, or 3 weeks before, and that'll give you a few extra points later in the season because you've got that extra premium before everyone else does. What do you reckon, Dan? What sort of strategy are you looking at in terms of your trades, which will be released on the website tomorrow, I believe?
Yeah, well, part of that is just being reluctant to trade out Gawn, considering he's got such a good it's been pretty well documented over the past few days that he's got such a good run to start the season in these 4 fixtured games. I'm going to potentially look at maybe downgrading a premium that underperformed in round 1. Luke Ryan is who I'm looking at the moment, and then maybe shifting the cash to potentially a Tom Duday, then looking to upgrade a rookie up to Patrick Dangerfield, who I didn't start in round 1, mostly because he had Matt DeBoer in round 1. But like, looking at his draw, he's going to absolutely explode and go bananas as well. So you sort of need to look at getting maybe a Patrick Dangerfield or a Lachie Nealon, who is playing all his games at the Gabba in these first 4 games. But yeah, it is hard, that trade-off. You know, you might be trading out Gawn and missing out on all his points, but you might be able to make up those points elsewhere with another premium. I think it's all really going to come down to whether rookies play in round 1, especially in defence. Like, we're hoping Stephen Hill can get his body right. He apparently is a good chance to play, according to the West Australian yesterday. Maybe even a Hayden Young. And then it will depend really if like a Zerk-Thatcher does stay in, which is fairly unlikely. And then you've got the likes of Starcevic, Brander, top of my head, McInerney in the midfield as well. So it will depend a bit about how many rookies are actually playing in round 1 before we can even make these moves. And, you know, I guess entertain maybe a Bewley or a Duday at that sort of elevated price until hopefully some rookies come around.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I like that strategy. The only problem is that these guys are all in the forward line. We need some of them in the back line. Yeah. So how do you get them? Like, can you? Because I don't think too many coaches are going to want to go down from trade out a Lachie Whitfield or something down to a Bewley type. You'd much rather go up from a Kavara or maybe Max King or somebody who's not going to score too many points. But then that's more money you got to find somewhere else.
Yeah. So my thought was, at least for maybe the first half of the rest of the season, you stick Lachie Whitfield and you stick Dustin Martin into your midfield. If you started with those 2 guys who are probably 99% likely to finish as 1-2 in the forward line, we think, you let Brett Bewley or you let Ben Long mature in value to 450,000. As soon as you want to trade them out, you go down. You've got the option and the flexibility of that being a midfielder or a forward, because you've got Dustin Martin and Lachie Whitfield sitting there, and then you swing one of them back to the forward line. But you need a fair bit to go right for that to all come off. And firstly, you need these players that have had one good round, but don't necessarily have the best SuperCoach scoring histories to continue their scoring to actually get to 450,000 as well. Because there's nothing to suggest that, I don't know, a guy like Bewley who averaged 53 in his first season over 7 games is going to continue to score 95 every week. We're working off the very small 1 round sample size that we have with shorter quarters. We've got the potential, as we know, as Ralph reported on Wednesday, that we could have a couple extra players potentially in teams from round 2 onwards as well, with the AFL considering that. So that's going to have some impact on SuperCoach scoring as well. But I think we've just got to go with the small sample size that we've looked at the moment, and that certainly brings a few of these guys in that usually awkward $250,000, $350,000 range into play for our trades for round 2.
And Tim, you were all over the mid prices pre-season. Were you ahead of the curve there? Because it seems like the issue is getting the right ones, but mid prices might be the way to go this year. When you say, as you say, you've just got to try and get up to that, say, $450,000 price range. And Sam Stewart, we loved him in round 1. If you were lucky enough to pick him, which I wasn't, but his pre-season scores were pretty terrible. If he produces a 50 and a 40 in his next 2 games, he's going to probably stagnate at 210,000 or something. It's going to be pretty hard to get up to that sort of premium level, but not as much of a jump if you can get the right mid-pricer.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the popular rookies as well, because I'm just going through some of the coaches' choice numbers on the SuperCoach website now, which you can click on that change data button and scroll down to coach's choice. And so we've got Tom Green sitting in 59% of teams, and we think there's a decent likelihood that he might get squeezed out for Callan Ward. I heard one of his teammates, Jacob Hopper, on radio a bit earlier today actually saying that Jackson Haitley and Xavier O'Halloran was another name he threw up that had been training pretty well since they'd been back together. So there's a real midfield squeeze on up there at the Giants, and whether Tom Green holds his spot a bit up in the air. And then Brendan Zerk-Thatcher's, he's just about the most difficult one to deal with, because we don't really have any players to downgrade him to that appeal. And then you've got to pay $80,000 to go up to Tom Doedee if he's there in the Adelaide team in round 2. So Brendan Zerk-Thatcher being in 47% of teams, this is going to be a pretty common issue that most coaches are dealing with, isn't it, Dan? Sort of what to potentially do with Tom Green and Brendan Zerk-Thatcher if they don't make the cut for round 2.
Yeah, we actually have a question saying, should we hold off on using all 5 trades? I think you almost afforded that luxury if some of these rookies are playing, but if they're not, then you don't really want to have these sort of guys just rotting away, not making any cash on our benches, and we may not even have enough rookies to play. Have everyone on field, so we're probably going to have to use maybe 1 or 2, even 3 of those trades. Looking at rookies like an Isaac Rankin potentially who missed round 1 but is almost certain to play round 2. Stephen Hill, as I mentioned before, and there's another one I'm forgetting, but and even potentially a Harley Bennell. Yes, yeah. We'd be reluctant to probably trade him in right away. You'd want to at least wait the week, and I think that is really the difficult thing. We're told super coaches, and playing for X amount of years, never to trade in a player after run 1 week. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant in trading in a Jack Viney who has averaged run of the mill below 100 over the last maybe 6 or 7 years. Had a really good debut year, but has sort of stayed at that steady sort of 95 to 98 across his whole career. And even like a Jeremy Howe, who he's pretty much the number 1 trade target, and people are forgetting that he averaged 79 across a whole season last year. So it's going to be really interesting, but I guess these guys may be a way to leapfrog up. But as you said, Al, a couple of poor scores and they may only make maybe 40, 50K, and then we're sort of stranded and we've wasted a trade.
How often have we seen in SuperCoach history, forward comes out, scores 100 in their first game, blows us away, scores 15 the next week, and then they bottom out at 180,000, and you've got no idea what to do with them from there. But fingers crossed that's not the case for Sam Sturt. Just looking at these stats as well, and Dan touched on it on the SuperCoaches Box podcast the other day, Al. So with the prices changing after round 2 or 2 games, players that missed round 1 and then come in won't change until round 3 if they play 2 games. But what we've gotten used to historically is when we hit that 3-game barrier, prices have changed pretty dramatically. So if a player's played well for 2 games, they might go up 60, 70,000 from 123,000, and they're pretty quickly above 200,000. But that's not going to be the case this year. So yeah, you look at the projections, and Sam Sturt's got the lowest break even of anyone, and his is minus 53, and then drops to minus 90 after his 3rd game. That is obviously working off projections that he scores 100 again, which might be a long shot. But I think that's going to be pretty important, isn't it, for people to know, Dale, that you're sort of not just pinning your hopes on what's going to happen in game 2. You've got to have one eye on potentially what the break-evens are going to be for the next few weeks and how much cash you're actually going to make from some of these cheapies.
Yeah, well, if, for people who are really keen players and get right into the numbers, it probably is worth pointing out that, so obviously big change this year. Player prices will change after 2 rounds. And so far we've only had the 1 game. But prices are still actually based on a 3-round rolling average, as they have been in the past. But what that means is for the first price movement, the SuperCoach bankers have had to basically use the first round 1 score and then an average of, the player's past history. So Jack Viney's break even will be based on what he scored in round 1 and then what he scored in his last game last year, or what he averaged last year. But once we get a couple of rounds into the season, that'll fall away and it'll just be based on their last 3 games, as it always was. So some of those, it's going to take a bit of adjusting, and I'm not 100% sure how it's going to play out, whether the price rises will be as dramatic as they have been in the past. But I think it'll start to look a bit more normal after a couple more weeks. So guys who had a spike in round 1, and someone like Sam Sturt, who's coming off a 0 base, I think if he can at least do something half decent in round 2, we'll get another really good price rise out of him, at least for those first 2 or 3 weeks. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. In terms of using all the 5 trades, I'm not having any hesitation there. If I don't need them all, then maybe not. But the fact that we already had a shortened season and we know that we kept the overall trades at 30, so 30 over 17 rounds, even if we use all 5, if you can, you can still use 2 every week up until SuperCoach, because SuperCoach finals are going to start in round 14, I think. So it's not, that far down the track, really. And even if you use maximum number of trades every week, you'll get there and you'll still have a couple left over. So, hopefully at some stage along the way, you can maybe have a week off, or, use 1 trade. So keep a few in your back pocket. But, I'm not really too worried about that at all. And I think it does open up a whole lot of possibilities. It's a very different year. And, you can afford to maybe try something that you wouldn't have tried before. And if it doesn't quite work out, if Viney scores 90s for his next 3 weeks, maybe you take, 100K price rise and punt him and get someone else. Or you go sideways, you've got Bontempelli. He's about to play Matt De Boer in a couple of weeks. Just go sideways to Dangerfield. And, potentially then you could trade back if it, works out in a month's time or something. So, you still want to be not using too many trades that aren't building towards a finished team, because every time you do a sideways move, that's sort of delaying your upgrades. But, there is a potential to, try something that you maybe would have thought was a bit too risky in the past, I reckon.
Yeah, well, I reckon you've touched on something really important there, Al, and that leads into a bit of a chat about the fixture, which hasn't really done Marcus Bontempelli too many favours. So Jack Steele, he potentially comes up against in round 2, who tagged him out of a game last year, albeit Bont was carrying a bit of a sore ankle. Then goes up against Matt De Boer, and he hasn't had the best record, Marcus Bontempelli, against GWS in terms of SuperCoach scoring. And then the round after that potentially gets George Hewitt as well. So I'm a bit worried about Bont. He's in my team as well, and he potentially gets 3 taggers in the next 3 rounds of footy. So, he's one that I'll be certainly considering trading, albeit I want to keep as many of those premiums in my team as possible. But, Dan, you're all over the fixture, and I think it's coming out in this week's Sunday Herald Sun, and it'll be up on the website over the weekend as well. Your sort of fixture analysis and what it means for SuperCoach as well. Just run us through, well, the 2 big winners, I think most people will have worked out by now, are Paddy Dangerfield. Mickey Randall, our colleague, called it Paddy's playground down there at Geelong, because he absolutely dominates at GMHBA Stadium, and he's got Melbourne, Carlton and Gold Coast in consecutive weeks as well, the bottom 3 teams from last year. So Paddy Dangerfield's a big winner, but who are some of the others that are going to benefit from the way that the fixture's fallen?
Well, as I mentioned, Max Gawn before, he's got some favourable matchups. Another one who we have touched on a couple of times, John Segler, has a couple of favourable matchups in his first 2 games back. He's got Darcy Ford / or Reece Stanley in round 2, and then he has let me just have a look. He's got he's got Geelong, then he's got Richmond. So Soldo and Nank, he should probably do a bit of a number on them. But then he has Todd Goldstein and Sam Jacobs. So a bit of a mixed bag for him, but he will have a good start. So he could, considering his 100 in round 1, he could have an average of about 105 round 3. Another one who brought up before was Sam Jacobs. He has a bit of an interesting run himself. He's got in that first round back, he has Todd Goldstein, so that will be a lot tougher matchup than his round 1 matchup against Darcy Ford. He's got the Bulldogs, who and Tim English felt the pain from Brodie Grundy in round 1, and then he's got and then he's got Brodie Grundy himself, Sam Jacobs in round 4, and then Segler after that. So those looking to maybe jump on a Sam Jacobs could potentially look for a Naismith as well instead as an option. Another one who's potentially a loser from this, a bit of an interesting one. He's in quite a lot of sides, probably about 1 in 2 sides. Nat Fyfe, he scores very well over at Perth Stadium. Obviously, isn't playing there over the first month due to the strict border laws there in WA. He might still score well in the Gold Coast, considering it is more of a contested players sort of ground, especially when it gets to the night and twilight sort of games. But he's another one that you might it would take a very brave SuperCoach to trade him out. But even like a Lachie Neale, who we mentioned earlier, who has all his games up at the Gabba, that could be like an absolute masterstroke if that Fyfe does falter. I certainly won't be making that move myself, though.
Well, Lachie Neale, I'm pretty convinced he's going to average 140, 150 in that hub. He's a phenomenal player as it is, and then he goes up against Gold Coast, probably going to finish bottom 4. Fremantle, developing side. Port Adelaide look like they might be around the mark, but Adelaide again rebuilding under Matthew Nicks as well. Like, I can just see Lachie Neale absolutely cutting loose for this next month. And if there was to replay, like if I was starting another team now, I'd be putting Lachie Neale, Paddy Dangerfield, and Max Gawn at the top of my list, because their fixture over the next 4 weeks suggests that each of them could absolutely dominate and average 140, 150. Who knows? Like, based on what we saw in round 1, it might even be higher than that, because we're getting shorter quarters and more points to be scaled, and we're still getting used to that aspect of the SuperCoach scoring system as well. So it's going to be interesting to see. Al, a name that cropped up in your trade options today was Jeremy Howe from the Magpies, who was another big scorer, top defensive scorer actually from round 1 with 156. I know you're potentially sort of using him to solve the issue that you've got with Luke Ryan from the Dockers and make sort of about 90,000 by downgrading there. But looks like a pretty good option, doesn't he, Jeremy Howe? Reliable in that he's averaged 90 plus 3 times in his career. And yeah, certainly intercept defenders like Jeremy Howe showed that they're going to score pretty well in this new system in round 1 too. Like he did well, Hayden Crozier did well, Shannon Hearn scored really well too. Those players that chip in at the back, hit targets pretty easily with kicks across the back 50, scored well. So yeah, he looks like a pretty good option, doesn't he?
Unfortunately, not all of those players did well. James Sicily and Luke Ryan, as mentioned, were not so impressive. But yeah, I mean, the thing about Jeremy Howe, and we've got to be careful about just chasing the points that these guys already scored in round 1. Obviously, if you didn't get those then they're gone. You can't get them back. But I did look at him quite closely in the preseason. He might even be my draft team, I think, because as you said, he's averaged over 90 2 or 3 times in the past, and last year his average dropped to 79. It was a bit hard to really put a finger on what happened there. It just seemed to be to do with the matchups that he had at Collingwood. Maybe Darcy Moore took some more of those intercept-type marks and Howe sort of had to play a bit more of a lockdown role with all the injuries Collingwood had. But if round 1 is anything to go by, he can be freed up again. And, yeah, when he does that, then he's great because, we know he loves to attack the ball. He takes intercept marks. Unfortunately, you don't get extra points if they're sort of you're standing on someone's head. But he looks a pretty reliable option. Like, I'm not expecting him to average 150, but I think an average, around the 100 is, pretty safe bet. And for that price, I reckon that's, you can't go wrong really with that. I don't think he's going to blow up, whereas, someone even maybe like a Viney, that maybe that was really one out of the box and he goes back and sort of scores more around the 80 mark, which he's done in the past. But I think Howe's going to be pretty safe.
Yeah, I don't know. It was such a hard game to read into because Collingwood absolutely dominated the Western Bulldogs. I don't think the Dogs could have played any poorer. There were stages there where Jeremy Howe was taking marks and there wasn't a player within 20 or 30 metres of him because the Bulldogs were pushing back to try and stop Collingwood's run on as well. So really hard to get a read on whether those numbers are sustainable or not. But fingers crossed for all those going after Jeremy Howe that he could pull it off. What about you, Dan? What did you take away from round one, and not just that game between Collingwood and the Western Bulldogs as well? Like, do you think the ruck scoring, for example, is sustainable? And what other lessons did you take away from the first 9 games of 2020?
I think it really was that, it was, as you mentioned, the rucks that essentially they're going to be around the ball more. They've got more scoring avenues in like contested possessions, effective hitouts, and the like. That they're going to be getting more points per minute because they're around the ball more, because there are less minutes to get that 3,300 points that is what the two sides add up to each game. And I guess, as I mentioned a bit earlier in the podcast, in this video, it will be those sort of players that make things happen, like a Marcus Bontempelli. Unfortunately, does have that pretty tough fixture first up, which may make people want to move him on. But it will be those sort of players that make things happen, that produce like a goal, which is worth 8 points, may end up being worth 10 points in the big moments, say. And even Marlon Pickett, just as an example, he was on about 20 at half time and had about, I think probably about 6 touches in the third quarter, and he ends up scoring about 30 or 40 points in that third quarter. So it will be like a bit of an example of, or it is a bit of an example of players just getting hot and scoring 40 points, especially at those crucial points of games, as Marcus Bontempelli showed he's absolutely clutching.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun year for following those the live scores, isn't it? Because players jump up all over the place. One guy we haven't mentioned yet, Curtis Taylor, popular rookie at Kangaroos, turned out he was a pretty smart selection, scored about 80 points, but I think he was on about 3 at half time. And he just had one good quarter, had a couple of few score involvements maybe, and half a dozen possessions, and all of a sudden he's up, ends up with an 80. So it's going to be pretty stressful at times, I think. One thing to bear in mind with those Bulldogs, which is not great news for you, Tim, because I know you picked 3 of them, but in terms of the fixture, not only have they got the Giants in a couple of weeks, but I'm not sure what's happened to there. They had you wrote up a very good article in the preseason about how they played like 7 out of their first 9 games at Marvel Stadium. So that's obviously all up in the air again. And the other thing, which is, if we're getting very technical, I quite liked about the Doggies too, was that their bye round was quite friendly. They had final bye, which worked nicely around sort of upgrading other players, and didn't have too many other stars missing that week. So that obviously isn't a factor anymore either. So everything's sort of counting against the Dogs, unfortunately, and maybe that's got news, not good news for someone like Bontempelli, who seems to have pretty much made peace with the fact that I'm going to be giving him the chop, I think.
Let's throw up a name that, I don't think anyone would have considered him. Well, he was never in contention really for round one, but all of a sudden, I read yesterday, he's flying. And the pitches look good down at Goshers. There's not many midfield rookies this year. Certainly none that have averaged 101 before. Ali Benal. If he's there in round 2, can we bring ourselves to go there?
What is he in SuperCoach? He's midfielder?
Yeah, just midfielder only.
123K. So pretty cheap for a guy that's averaged that high, but he hasn't played for a very long time.
I'm looking at my midfield bench at the moment. I've got Tyler Brown, Justin McInerney, Connor Buderick, and then Evan Robertson on the field, all of which may be out in round 2. So I may actually be forced to jump on Harley if he's playing. I just think surely they're going to give him maybe a game or 2 in the VFL, even if he's absolutely primed to go. There is no VFL. What's that? Sorry, a game with the reserves players of each side, just to get that run in the legs before he does, so he doesn't break down at maximum intensity when he hasn't played in so long. Yeah, I just think that they might give him that sort of that break in that opening round. But even if he is picked for round 2, I don't think I could pick him. If he breaks down and scores 20, even though we've got those extra trades, it just seems a bit silly in my view.
You have to look up his numbers. I don't have them in front of me, but he did play a comeback game for Fremantle. It was against Richmond. in
That's
2017, and that was his first game back for a long time, and then he hasn't really played again since. But I think he kicked a goal early, and everyone got around him, and it was a great story. But I think he finished the game with 3 or 4 touches, and he wouldn't have had many SuperCoach points. So.
Yep.
Yeah, it's hard to see him
coming
coming out and dominating. It's about 4 years ago or something since he had those numbers. He averaged like over 95 3 years in a row or something. So he can definitely do it. But, man, it's just an absolute massive leap of faith. But then, as Dan says, if there's no other midfield rookies, then you might
maybe
have to
forced to. I just think we can afford to. I just was thinking that we don't really lose anything from picking him in round 1. You watch in round 2, you just you watch him go. If he scores a 60 or a 70, then you jump on. Otherwise, you can you fall into that trap of trading him in too early, and then he does break down.
So his numbers, Al, just looking at that game that you referred to, round 22, 2017, he had 6 disposals, kicked 2 goals, and had 3 tackles, scored 62 SuperCoach. Then played the next week as well, 13 disposals for 41 SuperCoach. So, unfortunately not too much to write home about there. But, the years before that, when he was absolutely flying, it's hard to believe it was this long ago. 2012, he averaged 97.5. 2013, 96.5. 2014, 95.7, and then went to career best 101.7 in 2015. So I don't think we're expecting him to replicate anywhere near those numbers. But if he stays out there, you'd think he's probably he's going to be Melbourne's best 22 if he gets anywhere near the type of player that we saw on the Gold Coast when he was absolutely up and going. And I don't know, I'm kind of the opinion that if you're going to pick him, I know that there's some school of thought that you hold off a week, see how his body pulls up from AFL footy and all that. But I think if you're going to pick him, you pick him for his first game. Because we don't know how many he's going to get through. We don't know how often he's going to play. If you pick him after one game when he scores 90, like we so often do with rookies, and then he comes out and he is troubled by injuries again the next week, then you go, well, I've burned a trade. I've got no points out of it. Nothing's come of it. So I think if you're going to pick him, you see him named in the round 2 team for the Melbourne, and you go, yep, there's my midfield rookie. And at the very worst, and fingers crossed for Harley that his comeback plan comes off, but if things don't go to plan, then you've got a midfield loophole for the rest of the year. So that's how I'd be treating it, and I'm not against it when we've got so many trades up our sleeve as well. If you were to trade him in, and then you have to go sideways to another rookie to generate some cash anyway.
There was a game, if you think back to one of those seasons you're referring to, against Geelong, I believe, where he kicked like 4 goals and had 30 possessions or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he's obviously an unbelievable talent.
4 goals. 6 goals.
I think he's 6, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Speaking of 6 goals, how did Jacob Townsend go in that same game, that Harley Dale comeback game?
I remember that one fondly. That was when Jacob was an inclusion. I can't remember who was in.
It was a late in.
Yeah. That was the start of the great run. So, sorry, Tim, you've got to start it on.
This isn't the Richmond podcast, guys. So that game against the Cats, he had 27 disposals, 11 marks, 6 goals, 3 for 167 SuperCoach.
Wow.
So, if you
only
can do that,
167, I reckon.
if you can do that in round 2, that'd be handy. And based on the scaling from round 1, he'd probably score about 470. So, that'd be handy to have. I reckon before we wrap up, guys, we might just run through where a few of the most popular trades are sitting at the moment, and just get your verdict on those. So the number one, which makes a bit of sense, although Sam Sturt's under that bit of an injury cloud, is Ben Kavara, who scored 30-odd for Western Bulldogs, had 3 disposals on debut, to Sam Sturt. I think you'd probably both agree that that's a move that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just about a certainty that he's out, Ben Kavara, in round 2. We talked him up. I think he was a late inclusion, or there was talk that he'd play maybe 2 games out from round 1, and he hadn't played any pre-season games. It was a real shock, but we all hoped, considering he's spent so long on the sidelines, or so long in the secondary comps, that he would eventually get his chance. And he did kick a goal with one of his 3 touches, but 3 touches didn't really cut the mustard in round 1. I think he'll probably make way for hopefully Sam Sturt or an Isaac Rankin.
Dylan Robertson features in the next couple of trades. So he scored, I believe, 26 or close to 25, 26. So the second most popular trade is upgrading him to Jeremy Howe, which makes sense to me. And otherwise, it's Jack Viney, which I would assume comes via sort of Brandon Starcevic type swing, although you've got 5 trades, so you can potentially trade out a defender and swing a few players around that way. But what's your thoughts on Dylan Robertson, Al? I'm not sure if you ended up with him in your starting side, but I don't know. There's talk that Jake Carlisle might be back, potentially frees him up a bit to not play as a key defender as well. And I don't know, considering the dearth of defensive rookies, and he's only 260k, I'm keeping him on watch. Like, I think if he's break even 73, if he goes well in round 2, I might potentially pounce when a lot of others have jumped off him, because I think he's still a player that can make a bit of cash for us.
Yeah, I'm in a similar camp. I actually didn't pick him, but I went with someone like an Isaac Cumming instead, who scored maybe 20 more points, but is definitely much shakier in terms of selection. Like, Robertson's going to play. He's scored 80s and 90s in the past quite consistently. It really just comes down to his role, depending who the Saints are playing. I think they've got the Bulldogs next up, so not sure that they've got too many key forwards that he's going to have to stand next to, so he might be able to float off a bit more and get some more sort of cheap possessions or intercept possessions, that kind of thing, that score points. So, I mean, obviously, if you had him, I can understand why you'd be annoyed with that low score, and if there's a way out of that to turn him into a Howe or something, that sounds all right, but it probably wouldn't be my top priority. I mean, the main thing is, which, as I say, we're guessing a little bit now, but is making sure you're covering players who are not actually playing. And with Robertson having a safe spot, I think, in the Saints team, that gives him, a little bit of an edge over some of these other guys.
Yeah, and Dan, what do you think about Andrew Brayshaw? So he's Andrew Brayshaw to Sam Stewart is the 4th most popular trade. More than 500 coaches have done that so far. So Brayshaw scored 66 in round 1. He's got a break even of 80, so there's a chance that he might actually lose some value in round 2, albeit it'd be a pretty small number, you'd think. But for the limited amount of game time that he played, I think the figure going around was about 65% game time. He missed a couple of shots in the last quarter against Essendon as well. Could have easily scored 80 or 90. Would you be sticking fat with Andrew Brayshaw from the good signs we saw in pre-season, or is it an understandable time to jump off?
I was watching that game pretty closely, and I think that, like what you mentioned before, is the greatest concern, that he isn't playing significant minutes, and he wasn't playing significant minutes in his first 2 seasons either. He must have to work on his tank just a little bit. He obviously showed some great signs in the preseason, but in I think one of the games where he did score very well, there was no Fife or Walters, and when they came back in round 1. He was sort of shirked to the half-forward flank a little bit. He was obviously spending about half time in the midfield, but also time forward. But yeah, I'd probably be looking to move him on for one of the ruckmen that we mentioned earlier, even at Darcy Ford, if he is playing in round 2, or a John Segler. I think that's only about a 35 to 40k upgrade there. I think he's probably a more attractive option, or even if you wanted to go even a bit more, actually, I think, he's probably about the same price. Chad Wingard as well, and he had a very good round 1 score, and if he's playing more midfield and his body's right, he's definitely underpriced.
Yeah, and Al, the 5th most popular trade, again, to Sam Sturt, is Darcy McPherson from the Gold Coast. So he was a real buzz player coming off March series, where he averaged 130. There was some real hope that he might spend a few more minutes in the midfield up for the Suns, and maybe up his scoring, because his trajectory was looking pretty good, average sort of mid-80s last year, but a round 1 score of only 56. His break-even's now 112, so you think he's more than likely to lose a bit of value in round 2 as well, and probably one of those unfortunate ones potentially, unless he can turn it around pretty dramatically, that showed a lot of promise in the pre-season. We've seen it plenty of times before, but just wasn't able to translate those numbers to the regular season.
Yeah, I think those mid-price guys that if you took a bit of a punt and they didn't work out, obviously only 1 round in, they're probably the easiest ones to get rid of. So if you picked when we talked about Bontempelli or Gawn, but some of the top priced players, even if they, like I picked Sicily in defence and he scored 70, but I'm not going to get rid of him, because you pick him for a reason. They have the occasional down game, but you can be confident they'll bounce back. But with some of those mid prices, you're really relying on them starting well. And obviously they didn't. And with Gold Coast, probably be concerned about how many players can regularly score, well up there as well. Like I steered clear of Hugh Greenwood for that reason, and he scored over 100. He was actually pretty good in round 1. So of the Gold Coast mid prices, I think he's probably the one you wanted. But yeah, if I had Darcy McPherson, I wouldn't have too many worries about giving him the punt, and maybe trying to find a way to turn him into a Viney or someone who looks like they're on the way out rather than going the other way.
Yeah, terrific. All right, guys, well, been a pleasure to chat with you both. strange experience actually seeing some faces after the last couple of months that we've had. But hopefully everyone out there in SuperCoach land has been able to keep themselves busy during isolation, and now we're back with 5 trades to play with over the next couple of weeks. So looking forward to seeing not just what you two come up with, but also what all our viewers come up with as well. So thanks for dropping in for a chat today, and we'll all see you a bit later tonight because we've got our Zoom SuperCoach draft coming up, which I'm looking forward to as well. So, yeah, we will speak again soon.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, guys.
Take care, everyone. Cheers.